Actually, you were talking, it's funny you were mentioning Ruben, actually. Just a quick Ruben story. The first night I got in here, actually, I saw Ruben. I didn't know he was here. And I had worked with Ruben in 1998. And he still recognized me. And we worked on a project at Canada Life. So it was kind of nice seeing him. I hadn't seen him in like 15 years, which was interesting. My name is Doug Ferrier. And we're going to talk a little bit about storage and capacity planning for medium and large businesses. I worked in IT for 15 years. I went all over with education. I've been in the States, Canada, all over the place. I was a teacher at the University of Toronto for a few years, and I taught intro to the internet, and I also taught database driven websites. So I used to do a lot of that. Currently I am the Sharepoint administrator for Loblaw Companies Limited. I have been a programmer. I was a programmer for 10 years. I've also been a consultant running my own business, project manager, and an administrator for the last little while. As a teacher, I do tend to ramble on, so I hope everything's going to be okay with time. I haven't timed this out, the full presentation yet, so we'll see. There's about 30-something slides, plus an example we'll go through. What else can I tell you? The user base I'm used to working with is a large one. We have about 45,000 users. And that's going to be going up into over 100,000 in the next year or so. Loblaws has in total about 136,000 employees across Canada, and we're expanding actually right now into the States. We also have some independent stores now. They're just opening up in New York City for our clothing line, Joe Fresh. So I know that we're going to be eventually working with them also. So there's a lot of users. I know what kind of expansion path we're headed at. We use 2007 for most things. We do run a small little farm on 2010 right now. We're just kind of testing it out. But we're talking. Peter just mentioned, migrating that 2003 content up. We are underway under the process of migrating all our content to 2010. And the larger organizations, you can't just flip a switch. It's a very large process. We're going to be moving about 1.5 to 2 terabytes of information with kinds of customizations, workflows, and everything. Funny thing, right now I'm just trying to clear out this workflow history with one of the sites. It's got 330,000 entries, and that's pared down from 900 and something thousand. And then they add about 25,000 workflow history items per day. So that's the kind of scope I'm used to. It's a large scope. I am the only full-time administrator at Loblaws. We also have somebody who works about quarter time on things. I'm going to talk about what we will cover. I'm used to actually standing up and walking around, but I'm going to sit down for this, I guess. We're going to talk about storage options to help create a medium to large farm. We'll talk about a lot of the considerations for web front-end storage. Just a lot of things from my experience that I found working with these larger farms. We'll talk about a little bit about debugging and what needs to be stored and helpful hints around that. And we'll also look at storage issues regarding all 3 tiers. I'm not going to talk in depth about the application side or the database side. I'm not going to spend half an hour talking about database storage. I will touch on it. I'm going to touch on the application side. I'm going to do most of it, I would say, around the front end. Okay. For a large farm, I've given the example there from Dell, about a 2 terabyte farm to support up to about 10,000 concurrent users. one of the web applications I use on a daily basis, we get more than 10,000. Concurrent, probably slightly less than that. But I know we get somewhere between 10 and 20,000 unique users per day on one of our web apps. So it's fairly heavily used. And on the medium farm side of things, we're looking at about 2 web front ends and 1 index and 2 SQL servers. That's what kind of the definition I got from a medium-sized farm. One company I know a little bit more about also is Walmart, because I know we're headed that way. We're not going to be 17 servers. That's 17 servers just in their production farm. Okay, that's a huge farm. I think by year's end next year, we're going to be running about 10 servers. So that's probably looking at 10 or 11, I guess, 5, 3, and 3, somewhere around that type of configuration. And we'll be running Sharepoint 2010. What I won't be talking about, because I do not have a lot of experience in smaller scale stuff, is 1 to 3 server farm solutions. I know over the past year or so that I've been coming here, talked to different people, and they've said, oh, we're working with maybe 2 servers, and I just don't have any reference point for that, to be honest with you. The smallest, even our dev server environment has, I think, 5 or 6 servers just in our dev. We also have a sandbox server, or sandbox farm, and a QA farm also. So we run these multiple environments, and I'm just not used to that one, so we're not going to talk about that. And the other thing we're not going to talk about is external Sharepoint storage. I know we've mentioned it here before, but talking like blob solutions. Example I gave was open text. I don't want to go into that. I want to kind of focus on your everyday kind of out of the box farm that is in a large scale environment. Okay.
A question, can you define farm? Is that a single purpose group of servers, like they're all authenticating or they're all
in the same
reads?
environment? In other words, when I say that, it's just users for Loblaw. That's what I'm talking about.
But they might host different apps.
Yeah. Oh yes, for sure. Yeah. We have because of our groups, we have different groups all over the place, and so we have a merchandising group, and they have tons of different applications, all enclosed in one farm. We have one farm. It's going to be spreading out into multiple farms eventually. But that's kind of what my reference is. And I've learned this through the hard way. What I inherited about 3 years ago was a nightmare. And when I say a nightmare, I mean they had no plan going forward for the future. They had brought in, I think, 5 servers and said, okay, let's just go to it and get people involved in things. And one thing I guess I've learned over the years, just as a developer and as a project manager, is things really need to be planned out from the start. Okay? So I always say plan, and then plan again. One of your big things is, what is the environment going to look like in 3 years? Okay. For a large scale enterprise, that's what I look at, about a 3 to 4 year life cycle. Meaning, you're going to start replacing hardware and or maybe like a Sharepoint 2007 and 2010, there's a 3 year period. And then maybe you have, in a large scale, you're going to wait typically an extra year. So about 3 to 4 year life cycle. So when you're planning it, that's kind of what I go for. I go for a phased approach. I looked at, hey, what's this going to look like in maybe the first year, second year, third year, and then look at things like how fast is the company growing or shrinking. Okay, if I had known what I did taking things over, when they told us about a year ago, hey, you're going to have 100,000 users, and this thing was scoped out for approximately 10 to 20,000 users. That's a very large gap. And so if you can actually plan out, the more you plan and look at it in that 3 to 4 year time frame, the better you're going to be off. I've worked on all kinds of intranets in the past, and the new ones that I've started off from scratch, planned out for that 3 year cycle, they all seem to be in fairly good health when I've left, as opposed to when I inherited, which was a mess. So I'm looking at what kind of storage options are available. What am I going to be using the SharePoint environment for? Is this going to be just a storage repository? Am I going to be having publishing? Am I going to be putting lots of video up, lots of multimedia type content? What is the plan for debugging errors? I'm going to talk a lot about this because this is something that I've found that talking to Microsoft reps and account people, that this is something people don't always plan for at the start, how they're going to handle the debugging and or errors on the front ends, essentially. We're going to talk about a little bit about DR and how that's handled from a storage perspective. I just want to bring that. Disk management is not simply a function of providing adequate space for the data. You must assess the ongoing demand and growth and ensure the storage architecture is not slowing the system down. And they talk about 30% additional capacity on each disk. I'll tell you, just in our database environment alone, I think this week we added around 850 gigabytes of open space to be used. I wish that had been planned out a lot better in terms of moving content here and there. And again, when you look at things, how are things going to look in 3 years? That's really important because you don't have these outages at night, long maintenance times, things like that. You really narrow things down, and you can scope things, what things are going to look like.
Doug, if I can ask a question, I've talked to some people about the planning side, and they've said to me, yes, it's important to plan, but it's also more important to monitor and adapt going forward. Like you've seen yourself, an order of magnitude difference in the user base that you didn't expect going into it. The best laid plans are the best laid plans, but you got to make sure that you're watching the system and adapting and revising your plan as you go forward. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, definitely. And monitoring is a huge thing. I mean, I'm monitoring. A good example. Event at the start, we had a 32-bit environment. So monitoring that 32-bit, seeing the memory usage, seeing the storage dwindle fast, and then being able to scale up from there. So yeah, for sure. The one thing I found though is that you have to that monitoring goes with obviously the plan. So being able to do it from the monitoring. What sometimes you start out with, monitor and adjust for that. It's that adjustment that you can't always do unless you have some of those basic plans laid. That's when I'm talking in a large scale, because it's not that easy sometimes to just go and add a terabyte here or half a terabyte there when you're in a large scale, especially a 24 by 365 operation as I've been used to. Taking something down for a few hours here and there for maintenance time is really tough sometimes. We talked about it, I think, maybe 6-7 months ago, we talked about maintenance times. And for me, and I guess a lot of the other grocery places that I've talked with, they have a hard time finding that time out to do these things. I have an offshore team that works for me, and they handle all our maintenance after midnight. And that's the only time we can really do anything. So I have to schedule and train them on how to handle things, adding storage to the SQL servers, for example. As we monitor things during the day and we see various trends, we have to go forward and add that. But it's very tricky in a large organization to find that maintenance time. Bill brought this up actually a little while ago. and I fooled around with it a little bit, but I thought it was quite handy. I went through and did a couple scenarios with it. I don't know, maybe a year ago, six months to a year ago. And that is the HP sizer for Sharepoint 2010. And there's also the option you can download the 2007 version too. I'll show an example of that, I guess, after. Lots of options. It is a freebie. From what I've found from fiddling around with it a little bit, it's fairly accurate in talking with Microsoft, looking at our own scenarios, and looking at what it actually gives you as an end result. I thought it was quite accurate. So I just found there needs to be a few tweaks here and there usually. I went through a scenario, and what I put in was about 100,000 users, SAN-based storage, and this is what it spit out. And if you look at Microsoft recommends 20,000 users per front end, so they gave you 5 servers, front end servers for 100,000 people, so that fits in with what Microsoft recommends. Talks a little bit about the hardware, the front ends acting also as query servers. This is actually for a 2007. Should have mentioned. Your 1 index server, 2 application servers, and 3 SQL servers. I just put there a clustered solution is recommended for all large firms. SAN storage. This is where I kind of differed a little bit on what it was saying. If you actually go through what Microsoft recommends, and just from experience, this is a little on the small side, I found. I think that the actual physical disks in is a little light. I would go a little heavier, and I'll talk a little bit about that. But the actual configuration they've provided and the specs, I find are quite good, quite accurate. Like I said, I would just up the disk space a little bit. We'll talk about that. Another guide you might want to look at is there's one called, it's a free guide, it's Storage Considerations for Microsoft SharePoint by HP. It's by a lady named Wendy Henry. I went over it, I thought it was quite well done. She talks about flexibility being the key. And again, that kind of gets back to what Peter was saying. There is no perfect plan right from the start and hold true throughout the whole life cycle. And although most of the SharePoint content delivered by us will be stored on the SQL server, there are still a few flat files, there's more than a few as I'll go through, that will be located in the website's virtual directories that you should also account for. And flexibility. I mean, again, I think that is, again, there's no perfect plan, but the more you plan and allow for that flexibility, it really helps out. And there is no single correct way to use SharePoint. We kind of all know that from our experiences. And the more you use, the larger storage needs. And the more use, obviously, in the organization, too. I'll tell you, we started out really with only a very small core base. As soon as it started getting released, it just spreads like wildfire. I've seen that in intranets being released also, same thing. The more that you can plan to handle that expansion as fast as you can, the better you are. This is a little bit about the physical drives. The front-end web servers, query servers, disk performance is not as important as it would be for physical servers in an index role or a SQL Server database. And a fixed size virtual disk typically provides better performance than a dynamically sized disk. This is all from SharePoint Magazine. And if you haven't been to the SharePoint Magazine site, it is a free, it's online, it's very helpful. I go there every once in a while when I get a little bit of a chance. Some interesting stuff on there. If disk speed is a high priority, again, I'm talking about the large enterprise, Adding physical drives to the host computer is very useful. And also adding a new virtual hard drive and mapper to an unused physical drive on the host. This configuration, called a pass-through disk, is likely to give the best overall disk throughput. And in my opinion,